Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we're diving into something that can really add dimension to your photography: textures.
Yeah, whether you're shooting for fun or professionally, texture can bring your images to life in a way that's super engaging. So let's talk about how to capture those textures effectively.
Alright, so when it comes to photographing textures, what's the first thing we should consider?
Well, for semi-abstract, graphic images with a tactile appeal, it's all about emphasizing the texture of your subjects.
Right. And finding interesting textures to photograph isn't as hard as people might think. I mean, just taking a walk around your neighborhood can reveal all sorts of great subjects.
Exactly. Think brick walls, flower heads, tree bark, anything with an interesting surface. And don't forget, zooming in and focusing on the detail makes a huge difference.
Yeah, the more detail you capture, the richer and more textured your photo will appear. Now let's get into some camera settings. These aren't set in stone, but they're a great starting point.
So first up, camera mode. You'd recommend using
Landscape mode or aperture priority with an aperture of f5.6. This helps maintain a good depth of field to really bring out the details.
and for the lens,
You want to zoom into a moderate telephoto range. It helps frame textures without distortion and captures those intricate details.
good point. And ISO settings,
Low is the way to go, around ISO 100. That keeps noise to a minimum and enhances the clarity of your textures.
and what about flash?
Avoid it. Natural lighting is your best friend when it comes to texture photography. Flash can flatten the texture and make it look artificial.
Great tips. So remember landscape mode, moderate telephoto zoom, low ISO, and no flash. I got it. All right, let's look at an example. This image by Nikki Monroe combines corrugated metal, ragged paper, old stonework, and flaking paint. Talk about texture overload.
Yeah, it's a great mix, and there are a few key things we can learn from it.
Let's break it down. Number 1, lighting. What's the deal with lighting when it comes to texture?
Lighting is crucial. Shadows are at their most pronounced when the light is close to the plane of the subject, which highlights every imperfection.
So basically, the direction of your lighting can make or break the texture shot?
Exactly.
What about zooming in?
Well, shooting from a modest distance and zooming in works best. If you go too close with a wide-angle lens, you might distort the vertical lines.
Good to know. And finally, framing?
Be strategic. Frame your shot to include contrasting textures, but don't go overboard. Too many contrasting elements can weaken the impact.
So how can we take texture photography even further?
One cool trick is applying texture effects. You can shoot your own textures up close and layer them behind your primary photo in editing software.
That sounds fun. It's a creative way to give your images a material, patterned, or textured effect.
Yes, and always make sure the effect enhances the image, not distracts from it.
Let's talk about some alternative approaches to finding texture.
Look closely at both natural and man-made objects. Textures are everywhere.
And don't just think of texture as something you have to shoot up close. Tight framing can isolate textures even from a larger scene.
That's right. You'd be surprised how much texture you can capture when you reframe your perspective.
Before we wrap up, I have to mention this cool office block shot we found by a photographer named Mike Kononov. It looks so abstract.
Yeah, it's intriguing because there are no obvious reference points, just repeating elements creating an illusion of texture.
So, if you're into patterns and illusions, this approach could be for you.
Definitely. And remember, lighting plays a huge role. Even though sharp lighting enhances textures, don't ignore softer light for contrast and depth.
Great point. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, go out there, find some textures, and get creative with your shots.
See you next time.